Thanks. My name is George Reese. I'll have you guys come up here. Today's topic is on cloud management. Okay, there we go. So if I could have the panelists come up here, I'll do a little intro on the topic in a bit. It's a topic that means a whole bunch of different things to different people, and I think the panel that we got here is going to be reflective of it. It's a diverse panel from very different perspectives in the cloud space, and I'm going to let each one introduce themselves, and then we'll get into the questions. So go ahead, Peter.
My name is Peder Ulander. I'm the Vice President of Product Marketing for Cloud Platforms at Citrix.
Hi, I'm Reese Solnik. I'm the President of Appnomic Systems, Inc. And we provide application performance software to help manage your cloud. And prior to that, I ran a infrastructure as a service company called OpSource for a couple of years. We had 300 applications and about 150 technical operations staff. So that's my background.
Hi, I'm Kevin Reid. I am CEO and CTO of Virtustream. We are a 3.5-year-old company that has been heads down doing infrastructure as a service for very intense mission critical apps. We've been running our infrastructure as a service for enterprise customers, doing things like application service level guarantees and the like. And next week we'll actually be releasing our Extreme 2.0 software, which will allow us to do private clouds. And I don't want to upstage my marketing colleagues by talking too much about that, but we have a very unique perspective from running and operating many legacy and mission critical apps alongside the internet-oriented architectures that most people associate with the cloud as well.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Wayne Adams. I'm a Senior Vice President of the Board of Directors for the DMTF. DMTF is an industry trade association that creates standards. Some of the core standards that come out of DMTF are around management of the infrastructure. Long-standing standards like the Common Information Model and Symbios and so forth. So move into the cloud space, relevant standards that I may get in a little bit more detail about our open virtualization format, a new working draft that we released called SIMI, other work around cloud audit logs and how to federate those, and around license management. Other roles I carry in industry, I happen to participate in OASIS with a cloud group called Tosca, and down in front of us we have the chair of that technical work group, and I'm also the chairman of the Storage Networking Industry Association, and there's yet another cloud standard called CDMI. So I'm up here to talk about standards. When I'm not doing standards, I work for EMC Corporation in the office of the CTO.
So I'm George Reese, your moderator. I'm CTO of a cloud management firm called enStratus, and I'm also author of a book called Cloud Application Architectures. And you know, as we get into this discussion of, there we go, into this discussion of cloud management, you know, I say I work for a cloud management vendor. Well, there are any number of ways you can interpret that, which could put us competitive with a whole bunch of things that we aren't competitive with at all. And you know, up on the slide here, I've listed a whole bunch of different terms that at different times people call cloud management. And in particular, you have, you know, the traditional infrastructure management, the big four, who, you know, if you get cloudy stuff in there, people talk about them as cloud management, or you'll get people talking about things like Dell Crowbar as cloud management because it manages the deployment of an OpenStack environment. Or I've heard often one of the early things is Citrix says Cloud.com would be compared to enStratus as both cloud management vendors, and we're do nothing alike. So I think one of the things we're not going to clarify the definition of cloud management in this discussion, but hopefully we can provide some level of clarity about the different things people mean when they talk about it and what's important in terms of actually building a cloud. There we go. This is a diagram I put together to help at least frame the discussion a little bit about all of those words that I had on the prior slide, at least as they relate to cloudiness. And, cloud management happens to have the biggest box up there, and don't interpret that as being, the cloud management vendor put a big box because he thinks it's the most important thing. The big box means the biggest amount of confusion in terms of what it means with respect to a cloudy infrastructure. But you have to, if you're an enterprise that's going to be doing cloud, you need to put all of these things together to have a complete cloud strategy. You can't just go buy VMware, have a VDC, and have yourself a cloud that's just a VDC. So with having said all of that, I do have one more slide I have to do here. Okay, here we go. So this is a polling question. Y'all can take your time or answering it while we're going through the questions here. What element of cloud management is least mature and or serving as a barrier to cloud computing adoption? So if you could text your responses, and towards the end of the discussion, you'll be able to catch the responses in real time. So I'm going to start with first question for the panel. What do you think are the core characteristics of cloud management? I'll start with you here. Okay. I want everybody to answer this one.
Sure. So from our perspective, cloud management is somewhat of a layer cake, right? You have everything from DevOps and automation at the baseline. So if you think about Puppet or Ops Code, you move into cloud orchestration, which is your typical cloud stack, Eucalyptus, OpenStack style management. This is for effectively pooling the resources, creating the self-services, and enabling the infrastructure component of a cloud service. Then there's application and user management. That tends to be where you find an enStratus type solution that drives policy, governance, app catalogs, et cetera. And then we start seeing a number of pieces layering on top that depend on the use case. It could be anywhere from a BSS, OSS type function for a service provider. How do you create the business of a cloud and drive management at that layer, to how do you deal with things like log management and things along those lines. So there's a lot of different elements to it. The core features come back to how do you automate all of the components around delivering cloud services to end users and effectively manage them from a single pane.
So I'm going to answer this question briefly and see how the panel goes, and maybe some audience interaction on the most relevant piece of this, which I think is different and unique for every member of the room probably. So at the end of the day, cloud management for some folks could be, how do I deal with managing Salesforce.com or any other cloud app as an administrator. For some folks, it could be, how do I deal with open standards, applications, or resources in the open internet, and at the same time deal with and manage assets within my firewall to achieve my business objectives. So what I'd say is it's because it's so early and it is so varied and broad. The issue or definition of cloud management relates to what are you trying to achieve at the moment, and what is it that you need to do to get from point A to point B to achieve your objective as it relates to leveraging some of these types of assets or services.
So being a former consultant, I guess I tend to think of everything in terms of people, process, and technology. So, my perspective would be that cloud management is really about managing all three of those dimensions across the board for any infrastructure that's delivering cloud services. So what does that mean exactly? That means for people, it's about having very simplistic user interfaces that are appropriate for the level of audience that you're targeting, whether it's self-service for a business user that needs an application that they pick from a service catalog, or if it's an administrator that really needs to have a lot of detail around IP addresses and virtual networks and so forth for the application. Then there's the process side that ties in a lot with your GRC controls, as Peter mentioned before, the governance, risk, and compliance, really having all of that layered in as well so that you can have people get the appropriate rules for approvals of budgets and so forth, as well as having all the logs and all the other pieces that go into making sure that you're compliant with the right regulations. And then you've got the technology, which tends to actually be the area that people focus on the most, but from our perspective, there are a lot of different components out there, and that's really much more about integration. And I think my colleague Wayne would probably agree with me that that's really more about standards for that integration and being able to abstract the management of that technology within that layer of software.
Yes, using standards as a launch point, some of the three elements you keep on hearing about is interoperability, portability, and security. And there's industry standards that are available in all these places. And sometimes standards take a little bit of time to get fully entrenched. And as we're in this early days of cloud, when you can work with one or two companies to achieve your first foray into cloud, you can tend to be able to work out those integrations in a point-to-point manner. But when you start looking at the ability to have choice in the marketplace, standards provide that interoperability capability. And that's what's going to help continue to manage costs and make it easy as you look to move data or applications between different service providers that match what you're trying to do in the cloud or between the cloud and your own internal operations.
So I'm going to focus the question here to you on why is it that management is important to the cloud, and do all adopters of cloud actually need that? And then if anybody wants to respond to his answer, please do.
Well, there's, as the other panelists had mentioned, it depends on your perspective of what you're trying to do about managing the cloud. If you're a service provider, you're going to have to manage your infrastructure and provide reports and so forth. And if you're a subscriber to the services, you at minimum want to see that your service levels are being met and being able to manage your where is your data and are you in compliance and governance and all those aspects. So management said, what you have been doing historically inside of your own data center, and it's just being further extended out into the cloud. Now, a lot of things change. You don't have to get into the configuration management if you're a subscriber. That's up to the cloud service provider, but then it's further abstracted as, is it's meeting my objectives.
I think in addition to that, what we see a lot in terms of what drives customers to want more and more standards adoption is really to avoid vendor lock-in. That tends to be a very big topic for a lot of customers that we get engaged with. They'd like to know that if for some reason what you've promised versus what you've delivered, which has never happened before in the software industry, but I'm sure happens in the future sometime will happen.
What do customers see as being the point of lock-in, and is that really the point of lock-in? Is there a perception difference between where lock-in is happening and where people see it?
Absolutely. I think if you think of the stack as the way most people illustrate of IaaS and then PaaS and then SaaS sitting on top, I think everyone accepts that when you're in the SaaS layer, you're locked in. I think people view infrastructure as a service as an area that you shouldn't be locked in on, and you should be more portable. And I think PaaS starts to get into that gray zone because PaaS in and of itself has such a loose definition anyway. The higher up you are on that PaaS stack, the more accepted it is from the customer's standpoint that they can do lock-in.
Anybody else want to talk on that?
Well, the one thing I'd add to this dialogue is a little bit, I think, Wayne, what you're alluding to, which is whether you start your foray with one application or one VM farm or virtual data center or what have you, soon enough, if it's creating value for you, you're going to be dealing with a multiplicity of assets or resources or applications, integrations. And integrations is one of the things that at OpSource we were really challenged on resolving. And I think the standards and vendors and end users can collaborate to help make that simple. And related to that, and the reason why I joined this company is that whatever you're managing, whether it's a cloud environment, private, public, or an application, getting those metrics and the consistency across that so that you know what you're managing and so you can get that feedback loop to get a sense of whether you're achieving your objectives or not. And you might buy a SaaS application and think you have a great resource, but your end users are sitting there until the screen paints and it's performing slowly. Or you might run your own internal private cloud and it may be working beautifully or not. And so the one thing I'd encourage the community here to look at, and ODCA is already with its usage model for metrics, is to look for driving those metrics and getting access to the measurements, and in particular when it comes to integrations where this app is using information from that app, or there's some workflow or whatnot, or whether it's just interoperability of different components in a cloud stack. It's something that I'm always keeping in mind as I look at running our business or running our cloud assets.
So we've kind of blended a couple of things here, right? We talked about cloud management, and then we talked about interoperability. So going back to the cloud management piece, I think one of the most important things is we've got to remember what drove the advent of the cloud. Why was Amazon successful in what they basically built? It was because they drove self-service, easy access to resources, infinite compute, et cetera, et cetera. At the end of the day, they drove a system that was extremely well automated, right? Automation became absolutely critical. They got rid of the meat cloud and they automated everything with cloud management. And everywhere from orchestration to application management, et cetera, is driving that. So the question is, if you have a cloud yet you don't have cloud management, you're probably making a mistake. From an interoperability perspective in a standard space, that comes down to abstraction, right? The further up you go, the higher level the abstractions, the less lock-in there is. The reality is there are going to be pieces where you might get locked in, right? It might be because of the proprietary nature of some vendors. It could be because it's the way they basically run. But at the end of the day, in every facet of software, whether it's the cloud or traditional enterprise, there is some element of lock-in, and there's always going to be a switching cost. We're all capitalists by nature. Even the most open of companies is very capitalist by nature. I think what's important from an organization like ODCA, as well as what's important for us as vendors, is to find the right areas of abstraction to enable interoperability and make sure that we are supplying customers with things that meet their needs.
Guys, I think it might be time to check in on the planning question. Okay.
You gotta go back to the button.
Do I have to go back to the button or put up a different slide?
No? There you go.
So this is sort of a real-time, y'all have seen this in other things, standards and security and monitoring automation. I wouldn't expect automation because people pretty much get that these days. Show of hands, who picked other issue? What's driving or blocking to you?
I just feel like the approach many people take to cloud monitoring is just the bottoms up, gathering data, trying to solve for lots of smallish problems, and just ignoring the bottoms down kind of approach to what is the user experiencing and then how to solve for their problem. And then also not including all of the elements in the picture. I just feel like the old way of thinking of monitoring perpetuates these silos that don't allow you to really solve the problem well.
Okay, thanks.
Does anyone else feel this issue with this pain of monitoring or application experience? Is one here, or would it be helpful to take a moment on that? I mean, that's an area that we spend a lot of time on. So, and frankly, it's what I'm very excited about, and also why I joined this company. I'm not going to take entirely an Appnomic view of this, but I've spent a lot of time in the networking world and managed networks, and today your telecom company has enormous monitoring and insights as to what's going on within your network. And as data centers have evolved, we've seen the same evolve with running servers and the assets within a data center. And as the cloud has continued to proliferate and the volume of applications that are available have also begun to proliferate, they've moved faster than some of this infrastructure monitoring. And sometimes it feels like you're driving a car and you don't know what the speed is or how much gas you have in your tank. And for people who are responsible for running these environments or applications, you can imagine driving a car and not knowing what speed you're going. And it can be a little bit nerve-wracking. What's exciting about what's going on, this is a little bit of a tangent in this big data world, but there are now means to capture these enormous volumes of disparate data and pull it all together, and to do it from the top down. So I don't know if you're with a monitoring company, but you can start looking at the application layer and then down. I mean, who really cares if a CPU is 80% utilized if the consumer experience is great, or who cares if it's only 10% utilized but the user experience stinks, or it's about to spike from 10% to 100% and shut down. So there's wonderful new analytic engines, new mathematical approaches, machine learning approaches that are enabling folks who are responsible for managing these clouds to not only accelerate fixing issues when they happen, but also to get in front of that and to start to predict what's going to happen. Because if you can utilize these pattern matching technologies, you can now get in front of things. And it's just so complicated and heterogeneous and spread out, it's almost impossible to do it with the current tools or speedometers or oil gauges that are in the infrastructure today. So it's a neat area, and it's still a little bit emerging, so be careful what you pursue or investigate. But there's enormous value there for anyone who's responsible for managing or running these cloud environments.
So I want to talk about one area of, well, I think one of the things is just when you stick in the word management, anything could be managed. And one of the areas in which, I think the biggest division is really between, your traditional infrastructure management, what the big four are doing, and then cloud management, which is more dominated by startups than it is by the big four. So what is it that's so different about those two types of management problems? And do they belong together or do they belong separate? And who'd like to take that first? Somebody strong opinion?
Well, I think from our perspective, as we've seen, maybe going one step backwards and looking at what's happening right now in the industry overall and what we see in the way of what customers are asking for, there's a lot more maturity in what we see as a request from customers now versus, let's say, a year ago. And much of that has to do with organizations like DMTF and ODCA, ODCA in particular, driving a lot of the standards around customer requirements, and then prioritizing what sorts of features customers should be asking for. So we find ourselves in many cases competing against larger entities for services that we can provide, and in many cases the features that are being asked for are features that the bigger folks cannot actually deliver on. And I think it comes down to the age-old issue of innovation and speed of innovation and speed of being able to react to doing things quicker and being able to add features very quickly. Much of the modern way of delivering software allows software companies now to be more nimble, more agile. And as you get into worlds like cloud management, that, let's face it, as an industry, the cloud is still early. So what's available in features in software right now, from big guys and little guys, is still not complete. So what customers are looking for is an entry point that gets them, even if it's not the 80%, maybe it's the 60 or 70% of what they need. But then the rest of that gap, as they come up with critical pieces that are missing, they have to be able to respond quickly. And I think that's why we've seen so many small companies be able to rise quickly in this particular industry and almost hold dominant positions in certain feature sets.
So we have a similar position, although, it just comes down to the fact that certain things are designed to be purpose-built, right? Neil and I, we had a conversation earlier today where he says, look, everything that you guys do in cloud orchestration for Cloud Stack is available in BMC. And realistically, absolutely true. But to run the BMC implementation, you have the cost, the administration, the scale, you have all of these other things that come about that actually complicate the ability to just go run a cloud, right? So purpose-built kind of makes sense. It's almost, the equivalent of BMC running a cloud is like running a web server on a mainframe. Can you do it? Sure. Does the costs and the implementation and the administration make sense? Not really. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of these new startups come out, because they don't have the legacy architecture infrastructure that they have to go support. They don't have all the complexities of everything you need in a scale-up architecture that you need to go drive. They're building for a scale-out architecture. And when you look at traditional enterprise versus these new companies, whether it's an Amazon or a Google or a Salesforce or what have you, they have fundamentally different metrics on what it takes to manage their infrastructure. You no longer see one sysadmin to every 100 servers. You see one sysadmin to every 10,000 servers. These are fundamentally different, and it's because of the tools that have been created. And in many ways, it's what enterprises are looking for. Not for the entire stack, right? It would be just as stupid for us in cloud management to try and say we're going to go compete with BMC on their scale-up stuff. So, I mean, it really comes back to what are you trying to accomplish and find the solutions that are purpose-built for that.
I like that scale up versus scale out.
Hey, George, I have a colorful one on this one. I saw a photo the other day. I'd be curious if anyone has ever seen this photo before. It was of a steamship with sails on it. All right, so before the steamship, there were sailboats. And then there were some folks who figured out that they could harness the power of a steam engine, but it wasn't quite strong enough or didn't quite have enough distance, with the fuel available on a boat to get going. And so they had to accommodate where the technology was coming from. But the people who built sailboats were not really, they didn't have the DNA. This is how I've talked about it at my last couple of companies. A lot of the big legacy companies don't have the DNA, the intuition, the vision, it's hard to break out of the box of having built a hull designed for a sailboat for all those years and then to build a steamship. And the good news is that for startup companies that see the vision and have been innovating or developing these technologies, they can attract the mavericks from the larger incumbent companies who are the connection points with where the technology's been coming from and where you're going to. And so I have worked at both big companies, AT&T, American Express, and others, and small companies. And when it comes to where the future technologies are coming from and where they're going to succeed, by and large, my experience, and just like this metaphor, is that you need to look to the new companies, and the ones that succeed oftentimes get acquired and then get the stability or the ability to scale. I don't know if it's up or out or both. But then to scale from there with brand and financials and marketing and so on and so forth. So I would look for some of the newer companies at this stage of development.
I think DNA ends up explaining a lot in a lot of scenarios, even with why some big companies can do things and other big companies can't.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe I missed it. What startup companies are you referring to exactly? Just want to get some names.
Well, it depends what issue of management you're looking for. Is there a particular area you're trying to understand or get your arms around?
That's what you were communicating with what?
Oh, well, so in our market, where our company is called Appnomic Systems, and we help monitoring and management of applications. And some of the legacy companies include, I want to speak respectfully because they make some great software too. It's just that it's not quite as well designed for these hybrid environments or whatnot. But HP, IBM, CA Wiley, some of the companies who've been around a lot longer, who have great assets, great resources, and who also have grown through acquisition, who in some ways vote with their M&A activity when it comes to some of the more leading edge or new ways to manage these things. So Appnomic, New Relic, AppDynamics, Dynatrace is a company in our world that recently got acquired. When it comes to understanding what's happening at that application layer and what are your end users really experiencing. Does that answer your question? There's another.
So I'd like y'all to start thinking about some questions because we're running low on time, but looks like we've already got some, so I'll let you go.
I have a comment and a question very quickly.
Yep.
Over on science logic, so I'm a bit biased because we are the leading cloud management tool. We do monitoring and management for all IT infrastructure. And one of the things I would respectfully argue with your point, you've said it a couple of times now, that all performance monitoring comes from the top. Doesn't matter what the underlying infrastructure is, not true. There's certain things that you can tell from the end user experience. There are a bunch of things that you won't be able to put on in advance of that end user experience, excuse me, until it's too late. By the same token, I don't think anyone does it perfectly. Coming up from the other way doesn't do it either. I think the holistic view is the right answer.
Yeah.
The infrastructure and the end user experience too.
Yeah. So if I misspoke, we agree with you entirely. What you want to do is be looking at the application layer, which isn't as mature, and so there are a lot of technologies, service providers who will enable you to do that now, and you have to do the whole stack. But this is a good DNA example. Companies who are coming at it from the bottom up, who are more familiar with or comfortable measuring the sort of key component metrics as opposed to end user experience, and having the end user experience, ultimately what we're all driving towards delivering, in our experience, aren't quite getting to the same answers that our customers are appreciating. But you have to do the whole end user experience down into the...
Yeah, I mean, we just do this every day, and we're finding different results. We're getting told different things from the top layer and the bottom layer.
Yeah.
So very good forewarnings of things to come that we wouldn't have.
Right.
At either
That's right. So correlating them or finding them when you can get them in the guts before it hits the end user experience is such a great win. It's a high.
So that was my comment. Quick question is the one thing you didn't mention on manageability, I think, which is important in this era of cloud computing, is multi-tenancy, which means a lot of different things. We talked about the cloud stacks and management, but I think the complexity of multi-tenancy from different layers, I mean, there are a lot of service providers here today as well, right? And they're dealing with multiple customers, multiple layers of customers. A lot of people say they do multi-tenancy, but it's not really true. And I find, I don't know what you guys up there are experiencing, but I think that's where one of the biggest problems with you talk a lot about the big four, but just not making it through that next evolution. In other words, mainframe to client server, and now we get to this multi-tenant cloud environment, which is very fluid, and that's where the tools are falling, in my experience, falling hard. I don't know what you're finding as well. Multi-tenancy can mean different things, different apps, different services, different users. You're finding the same?
Jump to other questions. Sorry, I'll go you, and then you, I guess.
So anyway, one of the problems that I have is you have a bunch of different accounts with Amazon and Terra and a few stuff, things like that, and you've got a bunch of users who've gotten credit cards and done stuff out in the cloud. That's what I would think of as like sort of one of the ways of framing a cloud management problem. How would you address that kind of what are the issues? What do you need to have in order to be able to succeed in the cloud on those terms?
So multi-cloud is absolutely critical in that sense. I mean, the reality is shadow IT has gone out and basically taken the wind out of the CIO, and employees with credit cards have done a great job of signing up for everything from Dropbox and Box to Amazon and Terramark, et cetera. So finding ways to get that under control, given the fact that you're late to the game, is always going to be challenging because your users already have an experience, and you need to find ways of linking, managing, and driving policy across your multi-cloud management. Companies like enStratus and RightScale do that extremely well, right? They have the ability to provide that user administration, application management, as well as multi-cloud management, so that you can have that write once, control once, deploy anywhere type of an environment.
So unfortunately, I was told that was the last question. So if you, or can I take one more, or was that the last? Oh, I can take one more. So I promised you the next one. Okay.
Hopefully, this is a quick one. So there are really two questions, but I'm going to combine it. So the metrics in terms of monitoring SLA more deterministic, in a more deterministic way. Do you think that the prevalent metrics are sufficient, and it could be applied in a heterogeneous environment, like different platforms coming from different vendors, including software, or there's some enhancement must be made to get to a satisfactory level right now? The other piece is that the interface part. Do you think that there is a common interface that exists that could be used to extract those metrics? What is the closest one that you know from your experience?
So the quick answer to your second question is there's not a fully evolved common interface, and that's part of why we're here at ODCA. The second half of that question is the closest one that I live to is the one that we make. And I'm a little bit biased, but there are folks who are working on building these interfaces to facilitate metrics across different clouds, different service providers, different applications. And what we are finding as it relates to prevalent metrics that are used today and how it relates to end user experience and where metrics are going is that it's a little bit of a process of due diligence and experimentation. Part of what we encourage our clients to do is don't measure everything. Be clear on your objective. Maybe this is a good way to sort of tie this whole concept of management back together. Be clear on your objective and what you're trying to achieve, and then measure as little as you can to help get you what you need, because there is so much out there to get your arms around. And we're finding that if you do a good job with correlating the metrics, you can get very efficient, and some of these new technologies will help you do that. So I'd be happy to go deeper offline on that, but that's my brief answer.
The other two pieces to that always need to be considered as well is the performance attributes that you're really ultimately trying to drive towards. If you are working with a software vendor or a platform that's able to guarantee the actual service levels, then there's much less pain involved with the measurement because you know exactly what you're measuring against. So, it goes back to making sure that your objectives are clear. If you have an application that needs a certain application response time, then you have to have service-based monitoring within the application, most likely, to be able to extract that data. And if you're orchestrating across multiple platforms, whether it's multiple clouds or just multiple platforms within your own environment, then you need a cloud management software that's also aware of what's happening in that orchestration layer so that you can instrument the whole way through. And then the final piece to that is the financial management. There are providers out there like ourselves who are rationalizing everything back to a common unit of measure so that you can provision, manage, and monitor against something. In our case, we call it the micro VM. And it allows us to really have a view of all different platforms and be able to take the metrics, not just performance or time-based metrics, but also put financial attributes to it as well, so that you can get a financial perspective, which is part of what cloud management is about, not just purely making sure that your application is being reported on, but making sure that you're achieving your financial objectives as well.
We're out of time here. I'll turn it back over, but thanks everybody for your time here.
Thanks.
Thanks, George.
Thanks.